The hospital floor was cold. That was the thing she remembered most. Not the pain, not the blood, not the sound of her son's first cry cutting through the fluorescent silence. It was the cold seeping through her hospital gown while she sat on the floor outside her room, back against the wall, newborn pressed against her chest, waiting for a man who had promised he would never leave her alone in the dark. She waited 6 hours. Then she waited 6 more. And when the nurses finally made her go back to bed, she understood something that rearranged every bone in her body. He was not coming. The man she loved had chosen his empire over his child. If that story breaks your heart, stay with me. Because the truth is worse than the abandonment, and the truth took 15 years to arrive. Watch until the end. Hit that like button, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. What? Los Angeles did not forgive weakness. It absorbed it, ground it down, and handed the pieces back to you sometime around 3 in the morning when the city finally got quiet enough for you to hear yourself think. Amara Bennett had learned that lesson early, and she had spent 15 years making sure she never needed to learn it twice. She was 34 now. The girl who had sat on that hospital floor existed somewhere inside her still. She could feel her sometimes, that young woman with her whole chest open and bleeding, but she kept that girl locked behind something harder, something she had built herself 1 year at a time out of necessity and silence and the specific kind of fury that has nowhere left to go except inward until it becomes something useful. The bakery was called Bennett's. No subtitle, no cutesy tagline on the sign. Just the name, in clean black letters on a white background, on a corner lot in Limert Park that she had leased with the last of her savings 8 years ago when Elias was 7 and she was so exhausted she could barely see straight. The neighborhood had believed in her before she fully believed in herself. That mattered. She had never forgotten it. It was a Tuesday morning when things began to fracture again, though she would not understand that until later. The alarm went off at 4:15. Amara was already awake. She lay in the dark for exactly 2 minutes. She had timed it once, not knowing why, and now she always did it. Then she swung her feet to the floor and started the day the same way she had started every day for the past 8 years, with the knowledge that nobody was coming to help her and that this was fine. This was how it had always been. This was simply the shape of her life. Downstairs, the prep kitchen smelled like yeast and brown sugar. She tied her apron in the dark before she hit the lights. Her hands found the flour, the measuring cups, the rhythm of the dough without her brain having to participate. Her brain was already elsewhere, running numbers. The commercial oven had been making a sound. Not a bad sound yet, just a different sound, the kind of sound that meant something expensive was coming. She had 3 months of operating reserve. If the oven went before spring, she could manage it. Barely. She was thinking about the oven when she heard Elias come down the stairs. He was 15 now. He had hit his growth spurt hard last summer and was currently in that awkward phase where his body had outpaced the rest of him, long-limbed, slightly hunched, as if he were still adjusting to the new dimensions of himself. He came into the kitchen in his school sweatshirt and sat at the prep counter the way he always did, watching her work. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She glanced at him. There was something in his voice. Not trouble exactly, more like the weight of something he'd been carrying around for a while and had finally decided to put down in front of her. "You eat?" she asked. "Not yet." She didn't push. She pulled a muffin from the rack she'd baked the night before and set it on the counter in front of him, then went back to her dough. She could feel him watching her. She had learned to read the particular quality of his silences. This one was loaded. 3 minutes passed. Maybe 4. "Mom." His voice was careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed. "Yeah. I want to ask you something." "Okay." Another pause. She kept working the dough. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not. "Why don't I have a dad?" She had known it was coming. She had known it was coming for years. Had felt it building in him the same way you feel pressure building in a room when a storm is close. And she had still not found a way to prepare for it. The words landed exactly the way she had always known they would, like a hand pressing directly on a bruise she had spent 15 years pretending wasn't there. She stopped working the dough. She did not turn around. "I've told you about that," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. "You told me he left." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You didn't tell me why." "Because I don't know why." That much was true. She had spent 15 years constructing explanations, and none of them had ever held up. Some people make promises they don't keep, that's all. Did he know about me? She turned around then. She had to. Elias was looking at her with those eyes. She had stopped letting herself look directly at those eyes years ago because they did something to her she couldn't afford. And there was no hurt in them, not yet, just a careful, quiet watchfulness, the eyes of a boy doing math, checking his calculations. Yes, she said. He knew. Elias nodded slowly, like that answered something. He picked up the muffin and looked at it. Then why do you still have the picture of him? The question hit her somewhere beneath her sternum. What picture? She said. It wasn't a question. The one in the box in your closet. He said it without apology, without guilt, matter of fact, like he was citing evidence. I found it when I was looking for the Halloween stuff 2 years ago. I never said anything because I didn't know how to ask yet. He finally looked up. You look at it sometimes. When you think I'm asleep. Amara set both hands flat on the prep counter. The kitchen was very quiet. The oven hummed its slightly different hum. That's old, she said finally. From a long time ago. I know. He held her gaze. He looks like me. She did not answer that. She could not answer that. Because yes, God help her, yes. Jun Hyuk Kang had looked exactly the way Elias was starting to look, with that same stillness in his face, that same particular way of watching the world without announcing that he was watching it. She had noticed it first when Elias was around 9 and it had never stopped being a knife. You should get ready for school, she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he slid off the stool, picked up the muffin, and went back upstairs without saying anything else. He was 15. He knew when he had gotten as much as he was going to get. Amara stood alone in her kitchen for a long time after that, both hands still flat on the counter, listening to the oven hum. She did not cry. She had not cried over Junhyo Kang in 11 years. She had made a specific decision about that at some point, and she had kept it, but her hands were shaking slightly when she went back to the dough. Across the city, in a building that did not have its name on anything, a man who had not slept well since 2009 was standing at a floor-to-ceiling window on the 28th floor watching Los Angeles wake up. Junhyo Kang was 41 years old. He wore his age differently than most men. It had settled into him rather than on him, had deepened certain things without wasting them. His face was still lean, his hands were still steady. He dressed in dark, well-made clothing the way a person dresses when they have decided that appearance is a form of armor, and armor should be taken seriously. He had not earned his position by being reckless. He had earned it by being the person in every room who understood most clearly what would happen next, and by being willing to do what that required before anyone else had finished deciding whether they were willing. The Kang Syndicate controlled 17 legitimate businesses along the West Coast, from shipping logistics to commercial real estate to a chain of private security companies that handled contracts most people didn't ask too many questions about. The illegitimate operations were older, quieter, and more deeply embedded. Nobody who was not already inside the organization knew their full scope. Jun Hyuk had designed it that way. He had built an empire. He was aware of this. He was also aware that empires are cold places to live. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. He didn't move. The office was large and deliberately spare, almost no decoration. One photograph, framed on the credenza behind his desk, turned at a slight angle so it faced the window rather than the room. He had positioned it that way himself, years ago. He did not want anyone who came into this office to see it. It was not for them. The phone buzzed again. He turned from the window and answered it. Han. His voice was flat in the mornings. It took him time to warm it. You have the Choi meeting at 9. His assistant's voice was professionally neutral. And Miran C called. She wants 15 minutes before it. Tell her I'll see her after. A brief pause. She said it was important. She always says that. He set the phone down before Han could respond. Seo Miran had been saying things were important for 15 years. She had been running parts of his organization with the efficiency of someone who had been born for it, which she essentially had. Her father, the man Jun Hyuk had called mentor, and the closest thing to family he'd allowed himself before Amara, had raised her inside this world. When the old man died, He had trusted Jun Hyuk with his empire and trusted Miran with Jun Hyuk, and for years that arrangement had functioned. Jun Hyuk was no longer certain it had functioned in the ways he thought it had. He crossed the room to the credenza. He picked up the photograph. It was not a good photograph. It was overexposed along one edge where the light had caught it wrong, and the colors had shifted slightly toward yellow the way photographs did when they aged outside of a protective sleeve. He had found it in the inside pocket of a coat he hadn't worn in years, one of the few things that had come back to him after the accident, along with a cell phone that no longer worked, and a watch with a cracked face. And he did not know why he had been wearing it in that coat, or when the picture had been taken, only that she was laughing in it, looking at something outside the frame, and that looking at it had been the only thing for a long time that felt like evidence that he had not imagined her entirely. Amara Bennett. He had said her name to himself in the dark every night for 15 years. Not dramatically, not with anguish, though the anguish was there too. More like a man checking a compass, making sure it still pointed in the same direction. He set the photograph back down, exactly as he'd found it. He needed to be in a meeting in 40 minutes. He needed to stop doing this. He went to get dressed. The Choi meeting ran long, which meant the 9:45 ran late, which meant that by the time Jun Hyuk was done with the afternoon and his car was pulling out of the underground garage at 3:30, he was carrying the particular compressed tension of a day that had required him to perform certainty about things he felt certain about, and patience about things that had made him want to put his fist through something. Tae Young, his driver for the past 6 years, said nothing. He understood the silences. That was why he had lasted 6 years. "Go down Crenshaw," Jun Hyuk said. He did not usually give directions. He just wanted to not be on the freeway. He wanted to see the city moving around him. They moved south. The neighborhood changed texture around them. He watched it without thinking about it, or without thinking he was thinking about it, which was not the same thing. At a red light near Limert Park, he told Tae Young to pull over. He didn't know why. He would ask himself that later and not have a good answer. Something. A quality of the light or the street or some instinct operating below the level of language. He got out of the car. He stood on the sidewalk in his dark coat and looked at nothing in particular and felt the late afternoon sun on the side of his face. Then he heard a voice across the street. A woman. A woman talking to someone with her. Something practical. Something about time. He didn't catch the words, but the voice moved through him like a current. He turned his head. She was across the street. She had her back partly to him, was looking down at the boy beside her, was saying something with her hands the way she had always spoken when she was being direct about something. That specific gesture with the left hand. He stopped thinking. He stood very still, the way he had learned to stand when his body registered something faster than his mind could catch up. The boy looked up at something down the block. And then, for a moment, his face was in profile. Jun Hyuk's chest seized. He knew that face. He did not know how he knew it in the way he knew it. Not as memory exactly, not as recognition of something previously seen, but as something older and more absolute, the way you know your own reflection even in a dim and distorted mirror. The boy had his brow, his jaw, his specific stillness. Jun Hyuk was still standing there, still not breathing correctly, when the truck happened. He saw it before he understood it. A delivery vehicle coming too fast around the corner, the driver correcting too late, the vehicle swinging wide, the boy stepping off the curb at exactly the wrong moment. Amara's voice cut across the street, sharp and high. Jun Hyuk was already moving. He did not decide to move. His body made the decision, and his mind came along afterward. He covered the distance across the street in time that did not feel like real time, got his arm around the boy, pulled him back and in and down, the two of them going to one knee on the sidewalk as the truck's mirror cleared the space the boy had been standing in by about 8 inches. Silence. Or not silence. The truck driver yelling, someone further down the block yelling, the general sound of a city registering a near miss. But inside all of that, silence. Jun Hyuk was crouched on the sidewalk, his arms still around the boy's shoulders, and the boy was looking at him with those eyes. Up close, it was even more impossible. "Hey!" Jun Hyuk's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "You okay?" The boy blinked. He seemed to be running a damage check, the way kids did when they were trying to figure out whether they'd actually been hurt. "Yeah," he said. "I think, yeah." "Good." Jun Hyuk released him, pulled back, stood. And then Amara was there. She pushed between them with her hands already reaching for the boy, her face doing three things at once: relief, fear, fury at the driver who had already pulled further down the block. She got her hands on Elias's face, his arms, his shoulders, doing the same inventory Jun Hyuk had watched the boy do on himself. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't." Her voice was low and absolute. "Give me a minute." She held Elias's face in both her hands and looked at him, and something moved across her expression that she could not have named and would not have wanted to. The specific terror of a parent understanding exactly what had almost happened. Then she exhaled, one long, controlled exhale. She let him go. She turned to thank the stranger who had pulled her son back from the truck's path, and her face went completely still. Jun Hyuk watched it happen, watched the words leave her and not come back, watched her eyes move across his face the way you search for exits when a room starts closing in. He had imagined this moment. He had imagined it 10,000 times. In all of those imaginings, he had known what to say. Did not know what to say. "Amara," he said. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. "I need you to know. Don't." The word landed like something thrown. She took one step back, positioning herself. He noticed this. His body noticed before his mind did. Between him and Elias. He understood that, and it made something inside him go very quiet and very cold. "I know what you think happened," he said. "I know what happened." Her voice was not loud. That was worse than loud. "You made a choice, and you made it 15 years ago, and I don't need you to explain it to me. I didn't leave you." She stared at him. Her eyes were doing something complicated, something that looked like trying to find the lie in what he'd said, so she could be done with this conversation, and not finding it, and not being able to afford to not find it. "I waited," she said. Her voice had dropped further. The words were for him only, and they cost her something. He could hear that. 6 hours on the floor of that hospital, while I was still bleeding, with a baby I didn't know how I was going to raise by myself. I waited for you. "I know." "Don't say you know." Something happened. Something happened. She repeated it back to him, flat and cold and full of the specific contempt of a woman who has heard every version of every excuse. Something happened. An accident. He held her gaze. "I was trying to get to you. There was an accident, and when I woke up, you were gone, and I—" He stopped. This was not the place. This was a sidewalk. The boy was right there. "I have been looking for you for 15 years, Amara." The street noise filled in around them. A bus passed. Someone further along the block was on a phone call. Amara Bennett looked at Jun Hyuk Kang for a long time. He did not look away. He owed her that much, to hold still and let her look. Something shifted in her expression, just barely, just at the edges. And then she shut it down, shut it back behind whatever she had built over the years to keep herself intact. And her face went calm and closed and careful. "We're leaving," she said. She put her hand on Elias's shoulder and turned him away. But Elias turned back once. One look, quick and serious and searching, and met Jun Hyuk's eyes. Neither of them said anything. Then Amara steered her son down the block and away from him, and Jun Hyuk stood on the sidewalk in the low afternoon light and watched them go. He stood there for longer than he should have. Tae-young waited in the car without asking questions. Jun Hyuk's phone buzzed. He pulled it out. A message from Mi-ran. "Still need that 15 minutes." He stared at the message. He stared at the direction Amara had walked, the space she and the boy had occupied that was now just ordinary sidewalk again. He called Han. "Find me everything," he said when Han picked up. "Bennett, Amara, Los Angeles, whatever there is." A pause. "How far back?" Jun Hyuk's jaw tightened. 15 years. He hung up. He got back in the car. The thing that had been living in him for 15 years, that low, persistent pressure he had grown accustomed to carrying the way you grow accustomed to an old injury, had shifted into something sharper. Because she had not said, "I don't know who you are." She had not said, "You're confused or wrong man." She had said, "You left me with the voice of someone who had built an entire life around that statement." And the fact that the statement was wrong did not mean it had not been the foundation of everything she had survived. Something had been done to both of them. He did not yet know who, but he knew enough about himself to know that he would not stop until he did. The car moved south into the falling light, and Junhyuk Kang sat in the back seat with his hands still and his face still and his mind moving very fast through the architecture of 15 years of his life, looking for the place where it had been built on something false. He was starting to find the cracks. Amara did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed in the dark with her eyes open and her arms folded across her chest like she was holding herself together by physical force, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her and tried to locate the version of herself that had spent 11 years not thinking about Junhyuk Kang. She could not find her. That woman, the one who had burned the feeling down to ash and built something functional on top of the ash, had been standing on a sidewalk in Limerick Park 4 hours ago and had looked into the face of the man she had spent 15 years hating, and something in her chest had moved. Not toward him, she was clear about that, but something had moved, some tectonic thing deep beneath the surface, and she could feel the aftershock still. "I have been looking for you for 15 years. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. He had said it the way a person says something they have been holding in their mouth for a long time. Not rehearsed, too worn for rehearsal. The kind of thing that had passed through someone so many times it had lost all its edges and become simply true, the way water becomes simply wet. She did not believe him. She told herself she did not believe him, and she was mostly sure that was accurate. She got up at 2 in the morning and went downstairs and sat at the kitchen counter without turning the lights on, and she drank cold water and looked at the dark shape of the prep equipment she had bought piece by piece over 8 years, and she thought about what it meant that her son looked exactly like a man she had tried to erase from her life. Elias had not said anything on the walk home. He had stayed beside her, matching her pace, and she had felt him thinking, the particular quality of his silence when his mind was working. And she had not been able to make herself ask what he was thinking, because she already knew. She had seen the way he looked back at Junhyuk. She had seen what was in that look. At 3:15, she went back upstairs. At 4:15, the alarm went off. She was already dressed. Elias came down at 7, which was late for him. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his uniform and looked at her with the careful eyes of someone who had been up thinking too. "You know who he was," Elias said. Not a question. Amara was pouring coffee. She set the pot down with deliberate steadiness. "Go eat something." "Mom." "Elias." He crossed his arms. He had her stubbornness, which she had always been proud of and was currently finding exhausting. "He knew your name. You went white when you saw him, and he looks—" He stopped. Reset. "He looks like me. I heard you the first time. Then stop pretending I didn't say it." She turned around. She looked at her son, really looked at him, the way she tried not to look too long because of what she saw. And she made a decision she had been avoiding for 15 years. "His name is Junhyuk Kang," she said. "He was someone I knew a long time ago. We were—" She stopped, found a word. "Together. For a while." Elias waited. "And then he wasn't there anymore." She held her son's gaze. "That's the truth as I know it." "As you know it," Elias repeated. He had caught that. Of course he had. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "He said something to you on the sidewalk. Before we left. That's between me and him. It's not, though." His voice was even, which somehow made it harder to deflect than if he'd been angry. "If he's who I think he is, it's not just between you and him." She wanted to say something that would close this. She could not find it. "Go to school," she said. "We'll talk tonight." He looked at her for 3 more seconds. She counted. Then he picked up his bag and left without eating. The front door closed quietly behind him. That was almost worse than a slam. Amara stood alone in her kitchen and pressed her palm flat against the counter and breathed. Alto. 2 miles north, in a glass and steel building that officially housed a logistics consulting firm, Seo Mi-ran was already in the office when Jun Hyuk arrived. She was 43 and carried herself with the posture of someone who had never once walked into a room expecting to be dismissed. She was dressed in deep charcoal, her black hair pulled back with architectural precision, her expression set to the particular neutral that Junhyuk had long since learned to read as controlled alertness. She was sitting at the long table in the secondary conference room rather than his office, which was a choice. She was communicating something with the location. He filed it and said nothing. "You wanted to talk," he said. "I heard about the sidewalk incident." She folded her hands on the table. Tae Young reported to Han. Han reported to me. That's not his protocol. I adjusted the protocol. She said it simply, without apology. While you were handling the Choi contract, I needed visibility on your movements. He sat down across from her. He did not take off his coat. That visibility was not authorized. You've been distracted. I'm always working. You've been distracted, she repeated, and let the silence sit there with the word. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the calm patience of a woman who was accustomed to waiting longer than the other person. You had Han pull a background on someone last night, she said. Junhyuk was still. Han reports to me. Han reports to the organization. She tilted her head slightly. Amara Bennett, Los Angeles, Leimert Park. She let those words land and watched his face while they landed. That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Then you know who she is? Of course I know who she is. No hesitation, no performance of uncertainty. Just that flat, factual acknowledgement, and something about the flatness of it moved through him like a current of cold water. The question is what you intend to do. I intend to find out what happened. Miran's expression did not change. You know what happened. You had an accident. You lost time. You recovered. She said it like a summary of historical record. She made her choices during that time. People do. She was waiting for me. She moved on. Her voice was patient, the voice of someone explaining something to a person who is being slow. People do that too, Junhyuk. It's been 15 years. Whatever you saw on that sidewalk, it's not the boy. He watched her face. I need you to tell me about the boy. The pause that followed was very small, a quarter of a second perhaps, but he had spent 20 years in rooms where a quarter of a second meant everything, and he caught it the way you catch a movement at the edge of your vision. Miran's hand, still folded on the table, did not move. I don't know anything about a child, she said. Junhyuk looked at her. He said nothing. He kept looking. She met his gaze. Her expression was even. Her breathing was even. But something behind her eyes was working, moving, making calculations, and he recognized that because he had seen her make calculations for 20 years, and he knew what it looked like from the outside. His name is Elias, Junhyuk said. He's approximately 15 years old. I told you, I don't... He has my eyes. He said it quietly. No weight in the delivery, just the fact, placed on the table between them like an object. He has my jaw. He has the way I hold myself when I'm reading a situation. He paused. You've known Amara Bennett's name for 15 years. You knew her before I did. Your father introduced us. Miran was very still. I'm going to ask you one question, Junhyuk said. I want you to think about your answer. She waited. What did you know? And when did you know it? The room was very quiet. Through the glass wall of the conference room, the outer office moved in its normal rhythms. Phones, keyboards, people walking between desks. All of it remote and irrelevant. Miran unfolded her hands. She set them flat on the table, palms down, a gesture he had never seen from her before. Too open, too exposed. I knew she had a child, she said. Her voice had changed register, not softer exactly, stripped of something. After the accident, when you were recovering, one of our people saw her. She had the baby. Junhyuk did not move. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were barely functional. Her voice picked up a thread of something that might, in another person, have been defensiveness. You'd been unconscious for 9 days. You had gaps in your memory. The organization was exposed. Your father's old enemies were looking for weakness. I made a decision. She held his gaze. I decided that the information would not help you. You decided. Yes. You decided what information I was permitted to have about my own life. I protected you. The words came out with force now, the force of something she'd held a position on for a long time and was not prepared to surrender. That's what I have always done. Your father asked me to, my father is dead. His voice came out very quiet, very cold. He has been dead for 16 years. You do not get to use him to justify this. I kept this organization alive. I will hear about the organization later. He leaned forward slightly. Right now, I am asking you to tell me what you knew about Amara. All of it. Everything. And I need you to understand that if I find out later, from any source, that what you tell me now is incomplete, we will be having a very different conversation. Miran looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that he could not fully read. Not guilt exactly, more complex than guilt. The expression of a person who has been certain about something for a very long time and is beginning, against their will, to feel the first vibration of doubt. I knew about the child, she said. I knew she had named him after her grandfather. I knew she stayed in Los Angeles. She paused. I knew she was waiting for you in those first weeks. The words hit him somewhere he did not show. And you didn't tell me, he said. No. And when I started looking, I redirected the search. She said it without flinching. Twice, in the second year and again in the fifth. You were close both times, and I... She stopped. The silence was absolute. You redirected the search, he said. Yes. Junhyuk stood up. He did not do anything else. He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the city and breathed, just breathed, for 30 seconds while everything inside him reconfigured around a new and terrible understanding. When he turned back, his face was arranged. Get out, he said. Miran didn't move immediately. Junhyuk, I won't say it again. She looked at him for one more moment. And what crossed her face then was something rawer than he had expected from her, something almost like grief, though he could not afford to care about that right now. And then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. Everything I did was for this organization, she said, for your survival. You would not have this empire. Leave, he said. She left. He stood alone in the conference room and looked at the city and thought about a woman sitting on a hospital floor and a child who had grown up with his face and none of his name. And he did not touch anything in the room because he did not trust himself right now to be that close to something breakable. Amara was elbows deep in the afternoon prep when the black car pulled up outside. She saw it through the front window. She always kept the front window in her peripheral vision, old habit, the habit of a woman who had spent years quietly alert, and she set down the pastry brush and wiped her hands on her apron and did not move toward the door. Danny, her counterstaff, glanced at her. You expecting someone? Finish the trays, she said. She went to the front herself. Junhyuk was outside. He was standing beside the car rather than in it, and he was not wearing the coat from yesterday. He was in a dark sweater and his hands were at his sides, and the body language was different from yesterday, less controlled, more like a man who had recently been through something and had not fully settled back into his own skin yet. She pushed through the front door and let it fall shut behind her. This is my place of business, she said. I know. I'm sorry. He meant it. She could hear that, which was inconvenient. I needed to see you before I lost the nerve. That surprised her enough that she didn't immediately respond. He looked at her directly. I found out some things this morning about the night Elias was born. About what happened after. Her stomach tightened. What kind of things? The kind that are going to change what you believe about that night. He paused. I need you to hear me out. Not here, not in front of your staff, but somewhere, soon. You think I'm just going to... No. He shook his head. I don't think you're going to do anything just because I asked. That's not who you are. Something passed through his expression. It's one of the things I... He stopped, reset. I'm asking you to give me an hour. After that, if you want me to disappear, I will. Amara looked at him. She looked at the car, at the driver still behind the wheel who was carefully looking elsewhere, at the street behind Junhyuk where her neighborhood moved in its normal afternoon rhythms. She looked at his face. She looked for the lie. She had spent 15 years being good at finding lies, because a woman running a business alone, raised a child alone in this city, had to be good at finding them, and she could not find it. That terrified her more than anything else. Come back at 7, she said. After we close. You get an hour. He nodded, once. And you don't come inside, she said. We talk in the back parking lot, where I can see the street. Okay. And if you say one thing that feels like manipulation, then you walk away and I don't follow. He held her gaze. I understand. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she went back inside. She stood behind the counter for 30 seconds before her hands had stopped shaking enough to pick up the pastry brush again. Chunk. At 5:47, 20 minutes before closing, Elias walked in. He was not supposed to be there. Tuesdays he had track. She knew immediately something was wrong. Practice get canceled? She asked, though his face already told her it hadn't. I left early. He set his bag on the floor beside the counter and looked at her directly. I looked him up. She went still. Elias. Jun Hyuk Kang, Kang Syndicate. His voice was controlled in the particular way of a teenager controlling something large. He's not just some guy, Mom. I know what he is. Do you? He was not quite accusing, more like a person laying facts on a table to see if someone else was seeing the same facts. Because the articles I found describe a man who runs. I know what he runs. She kept her voice level. I knew who he was when I was with him. Elias absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. And you were okay with it, he said. I was 20. She met his eyes. I was in love with someone and I made choices I might have made differently now. That's what 20 looks like sometimes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, he came here, didn't he? She didn't answer. I saw the car from the bus, Elias said. A black car parked out front, same one from yesterday. He looked at her. Are you going to talk to him? Amara looked at her son, 15 years old, and carrying 15 years of questions in a face that was becoming, month by month, a mirror she could not look away from. Yes, she said. Elias nodded slowly. I want to be there, he said. No. He might be my... No, Elias. Her voice came down with more force than she intended, and she watched him pull back slightly, recalibrate. She softened it. Not yet. Let me hear what he has to say first. Let me figure out what's real. She paused. Can you trust me to do that? He looked at her for a long time. Yeah, he said finally. But Mom. He held her gaze. Don't make the decision for me. Whatever he says, whatever you decide, I'm not a kid anymore. I get to know. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. You'll know. He picked up his bag. He went to the back and started on his homework at the small table near the storage room, where he had done his homework since he was 7, and Amara turned back to the closing routine and tried to prepare herself for 7 o'clock. She was not prepared. She did not think any amount of preparation would have been sufficient. Joan Hyuk arrived at 6:58. She let the last staff member out at 7 and locked the front and went around to the back parking lot, where the security light buzzed in the early November dark, and the air smelled like the dumpsters from the restaurant 2 lots over. He was leaning against the brick wall with his hands in his pockets, not performing casualness, just standing the way a person stands when they have run out of performances. She crossed her arms and waited. He told her. He told her about the accident, the 9 days he could not account for, the gaps in his memory when he woke up, the phone that was gone, the calls that Miran had told him she'd made on his behalf, the searches that had gone nowhere, the way she had been described to him, moved on, started over, made clear she wanted no contact. He told her what Miran had admitted that morning. He told her about the redirected searches. He told it without ornamentation, without asking her to feel anything in particular about it, and that the lack of a plea in his voice was what made it land the way it did. Because she had braced herself against manipulation, and this was not manipulation. This was a man reading her a list of facts about her own life that she had not known, and the facts had the texture of truth, the specific roughness of things that had happened and left marks. She did not speak while he talked. When he finished, the parking lot was very quiet. Your phone was working, she said. Her voice came out strange, flatter than she intended. I called you 7 times while I was in labor. They all went to voicemail. My phone was taken from me at the accident scene. He paused. I don't know by whom. Miran was the first person at the hospital when I woke up. She managed everything in those first days while I was... He stopped. I couldn't verify anything she told me. I didn't have the capacity to. She told you I moved on. She told me you'd been informed of the accident and that you had decided... He stopped again. His jaw worked. That you had decided to handle things on your own. Amara laughed. It came out short and hard and not remotely like laughter. She said that. Yes. And you believed her. I had been unconscious for 9 days and I didn't know what year it was. The words came out rough. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you what happened. She turned away from him. She put her back to him and looked at the chain link fence at the far edge of the lot and breathed through her nose. She could feel the whole architecture of the last 15 years shifting under her, great structural pieces moving against each other, and she needed to hold very still while that happened, or she was going to say something she could not take back. I told Elias his father left us, she said, still with her back to him. Silence. I told him that every time he asked, every version of that question, for 15 years, I told him his father made a choice and walked away. She paused. I raised him on that story. I built everything on that story. Amara, don't. She turned back around. Her eyes were dry. She needed them to stay dry right now. I'm not finished. He stopped. If what you're telling me is true, she held up a hand before he could speak. I said if. I haven't decided yet. If it's true, then someone took 15 years from my son. Someone decided that he didn't deserve a father. Someone looked at my child and decided that his life was an acceptable loss. Her voice was very controlled. The control was costing her something visible. And that person is still inside your organization. She's not... Is she gone? Amara asked. Right now, is she removed? He hesitated, half a second. Not yet, he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the parking lot. Then we're done for tonight, Amara said. She took a step back toward the door. You want me to believe you. You want me to hear you and open some door that I have kept shut for 15 years and let you back into my life and my son's life. Her voice was steady, absolutely steady, because she was holding it there with both hands. But the person who did this to us is still sitting in your building, and you have not removed her. And that tells me something about where I rank in your priorities. It's more complicated than it always is. She turned to the door. When it's simple, call me. Amara. His voice stopped her, not because of anything demanding in it, but because of the specific exhaustion in it, the exhaustion of 15 years in a single syllable. I found out this morning. I needed to talk to you before I did anything else. I needed you to know first. She stood with her hand on the door. Why? She asked. Not combative, genuine. Because you deserve to hear it from me. A pause. Not from a lawyer. Not from someone I sent. From me. She stood there for 3 seconds. 4. She went inside without answering. She locked the door. She stood with her back against it in the dark hallway, and from the back room she could hear the small sounds of Elias at his table, the turn of a page, the scratch of a pencil, and the sound of her child existing. The simple animal fact of him alive and present and near moved through her like something she had no word for. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was female. Older. Precise. Ms. Bennett? A pause. My name is Seo Mi Ran. I believe you've been speaking with Jun Hyuk today. Another pause. I think it would be wise for us to talk before he tells you anything further. I have information you need to hear, information about the night of the accident. The voice was smooth and careful and utterly controlled. Information he doesn't know I have. Amar's hand tightened on the phone. Information, she said. Like what? Like the fact that the accident wasn't an accident, Miran said, and the fact that the person who arranged it is someone you have already met. The hallway was very dark. Through the door behind her, the parking lot security light buzzed. Who? Amara said. Miran told her a name, and the floor shifted beneath Amara Bennett's feet in a way that had nothing to do with the building, because the name Miran had just said was a name she knew, a name she trusted, a name that had been present in her life in the years after Jun Hyuk disappeared with a kindness and a consistency that she had never questioned. Until now. The name Miran had said was Marcus Webb. Amara stood in the dark hallway with the phone against her ear and let that name move through her, and the thing it did to her was not immediate. It arrived in stages, the way a serious injury sometimes does, the pain finding you slowly as the shock recedes. Marcus Webb, who had shown up 6 weeks after Elias was born with a casserole and a card signed by people from the community center where Amara had taken a grant-writing workshop the previous year. Who had said, "I heard you were going through something," without asking what the something was? Who had helped her find the lease on the bakery space? Who had co-signed the first small business loan when her credit wasn't enough on its own? Who had been present at every significant moment of the past 14 years with the reliable warmth of a man who simply believed in doing good in his community? Marcus Webb, who was 61 years old and ran a neighborhood development nonprofit called West Side Forward and had 3 grandchildren whose photographs he kept on his desk, and who had never once, in 14 years, mentioned knowing anyone named Junhyo Kang. "You're lying," Amara said. Her voice came out very quiet. "I understand why you'd think that." Miran's voice was careful, measured. "But I have documentation. Physical records from the night of the accident. I've been holding them for a long time, and I need you to see them before Jun Hyuk makes a move that can't be undone." "Why would you give me anything?" Amara pressed her free hand flat against the wall beside her. "You're the one who hid us from him. You're the one who—" "I made decisions I believed were correct." No apology in it, just the statement, carried with a steadiness that was somehow more disturbing than defensiveness would have been. Some of them were. Some of them— A pause that sounded, against Amara's will, genuine. "I need to see you in person, tomorrow morning. I will come to wherever you choose." "You think I'm going to meet with you alone?" "Bring whoever you need. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for 1 hour." Another pause. "Ms. Bennett, Marcus Webb has been inside your life for 14 years. If what I have is real, you need to know before he finds out that Junhyuk found you." The hallway hummed around her. The security light outside pulsed its weak yellow through the small window above the door. From the back room, Elias shifted in his chair. The sound of him, so ordinary, so unremarkable, her child doing his homework 20 feet away, landed in her chest like something physical. "Send me something tonight," Amara said. "One thing, a document, a photograph, anything. Enough that I know you're not inventing this." A pause. Then, "Check your email in 10 minutes. Miran ended the call. Amara stood in the hallway. She counted her own breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. She had learned to do this years ago. When Elias was sick, when the money was short, when the fear got big enough to fill a room, count the breaths, stay in your body. The world is still the same size it was 30 seconds ago. She was not sure that was true right now. She went to the back room. Elias looked up from his textbook. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine." She moved to the small counter in the corner and started making tea she did not want, keeping her back to him so he couldn't see her face. "How's the homework?" "Done." A pause. "Mom." Was that him on the phone?" "No." She poured water that wasn't hot enough yet. "Just a supplier. Go ahead and pack up." He did not push. He packed up. She heard him zip his bag, heard the chair scrape back, heard him stop in the doorway. "I looked at the picture," he said. "The one in your closet." She turned around. "I've been looking at it since I was 13, he said. He was not ashamed of it. He said it like a fact about himself he had accepted. "I used to try to figure out what kind of person walks away from a kid." He paused. "But that's not what his face looks like. In that picture." He met her eyes. "His face looks like someone who didn't want to go anywhere." Amara said nothing. Elias nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something, and went to get his jacket. Bolts. The email came 9 minutes later. One attachment. A scanned document, the scan slightly skewed, the paper and the image yellowed at the edges. Old enough to be physical, too specific to be fabricated quickly. It was a hospital intake form from Cedars-Sinai, dated 15 years ago, 2 days after Elias was born. In the field marked Emergency Contact Notified, a name had been written in by hand. Not Amara Bennett, Marcus Webb. Below it, a phone number she did not recognize. And below that, a note in a different handwriting, smaller, cramped, per MW. "Do not contact family or associates of patient until further notice." Amara read it 3 times. She read it a 4th time. She set the phone down and picked it up and read it again. The patient was Junhyuk Kang. Marcus Webb had been his emergency contact. Marcus Webb had instructed the hospital not to contact anyone. She sat down on the floor of her back room because her legs had made a decision she hadn't been consulted about. and she sat there with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and the phone in her hand, and she thought about 14 years of casseroles and co-signatures, and I heard you were going through something, and she thought about how completely she had trusted this man, how thoroughly she had let him into the structure of her life, and the room felt very different from how it had felt 20 minutes ago. She called Jun Hyuk. He answered on the first ring. "Webb," she said. "Marcus Webb. Does that name mean anything to you?" The pause was long enough that she knew before he answered. "Where did you hear that name?" His voice had changed. All the careful evenness was gone. "Does it mean something to you?" "He was my father's attorney," Jun Hyuk said. "He handled estate matters after my father died. He was supposed to—" He stopped. Something was happening on his end. She could hear him thinking through it, the quality of his silence different from before. He had access to everything, every account, every holding, every contact record. Another pause. "How do you know him?" "He's been my friend for 14 years. The silence that followed that was the loudest thing she had heard all night. "Amara." "Miran called me," she said. "She has a document, hospital intake form. He was listed as your emergency contact. He left instructions not to notify anyone." She paused. "He was in that hospital while I was in that hospital, Jun Hyuk, and he never said a word." She heard him breathe. "I need to see that document," he said. "I'll forward it, but I need you to tell me one thing first." She kept her voice level through an act of will she would not have thought herself capable of 20 minutes ago. "Is Marcus Webb someone who has the ability to arrange an accident? A real accident, the kind that puts a man in a hospital for 9 days. The pause before he answered was its own kind of answer. "Yes," Jun Hyuk said. "He had those connections. He was embedded in the organization long before I was." He paused. "My father trusted him completely." "And you?" "I stopped using him after the estate was settled. I didn't have reason to trust him or distrust him. He just—" She could hear him put it together in real time. "He just stopped being relevant." "He wasn't irrelevant," Amar said. "He was watching." She forwarded the document and hung up. But then, she did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, she called Danny and told him to open without her. At 7:15, she dropped Elias at school. He looked at her face when she pulled up to the curb and said what happened, and she said, "I'll explain tonight. I promise. Get to class." And he got out of the car with that careful watching look he had, the one that was Jun Hyuk's and had always been Jun Hyuk's, and that she was going to have to stop pretending was just coincidence. She met Miran at a coffee shop in Culver City at 8 o'clock. She brought nothing. No lawyer, no friend. She had thought about it and decided that what she needed from this meeting was information, and that bringing someone else would change the dynamic in a way that might make Miran more careful about what she gave. Miran was already there. She was sitting with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, a leather portfolio on the table in front of her. She looked like she had slept about as well as Amara had, which was the most human Amara had ever seen her appear, including the 2 times they had briefly met 15 years ago through Jun Hyuk's father's circle. Amara sat down across from her. She did not order anything. "Talk," she said. Miran opened the portfolio. The documents inside were organized with the precision of someone who had been holding them a long time and had thought carefully about how to present them. She laid them out in order, not handing them to Amara, placing them on the table where Amara could see them. "Marcus Webb introduced your mother to my father," Miran said. "Before you were born. He was a connector. That was his function in those years. Someone who moved between the legitimate world and our world, and knew people in both." She tapped the first document. "He was the one who'd brought Jun Hyuk's father to Los Angeles. He was the one who helped establish the Kang operations here in the early years." She paused. "He was also the one who handled 3 contracts that resulted in the deaths of 2 men who had moved against my father's interests." Amara looked at the document. A ledger page. Numbers and dates and abbreviations she didn't know how to read. She looked up. "Why are you showing me this now?" she said. "Not 15 years ago? Now." "Because 15 years ago I thought I was managing a situation." Miran's voice was flat. Not cold. Flat, the way something is flat when all the air has been pressed out of it. "Marcus had leverage over me. Records from my father's operation that could have exposed things. He used that to keep me from going to Junhyuk with what I knew. She met Amara's eyes. I didn't arrange the accident. I want you to understand that. But I knew it had happened, and I knew who was responsible, and I said nothing. Because he had leverage. Yes. And now? Miran's jaw tightened, a small movement, controlled. He called me last night, after Jun Hyuk came to your bakery. She paused. He has surveillance on your building, Ms. Bennett. He has had it for years. She let that sit. He knows Jun Hyuk found you. He called to remind me of our arrangement. Her voice went quieter. He told me to make sure Jun Hyuk drops this. He said if I couldn't manage that, he had other options. Amara went very still. What other options? She said. Miran looked at her. The look communicated something that her words were not quite saying directly, and Amara read it, and the thing it said moved through her like ice water from the inside out. Elias, Amara said. Miran said nothing. He was talking about Elias. It was not a question. Her voice had gone to a place she did not recognize. Somewhere past fear on the other side of it, where everything becomes very clear and very simple. He knows about my son. He has always known about your son, Miran said quietly. He was there, Miss Bennett. He was in that hospital. He watched you leave with the baby. She paused. He has been watching both of you for 14 years. The coffee shop moved around them in its ordinary morning way. Someone at the counter ordering, the espresso machine firing, a child at a table near the window dropping a spoon, all of it remote, all of it belonging to a different world than the one Amara was currently sitting in. Why would he watch us? Amara said. What does he want? He wants the Kang organization. Miran folded her hands on the portfolio. He has always wanted it. He spent 30 years positioning himself inside it, and he could never get close enough to the center of it. Your relationship with Jun Hyuk, the child, those were variables he needed to control. A son changes succession. A son changes everything about how power transfers. She paused. He separated you because a child raised outside the organization, without Jun Hyuk's acknowledgement, has no claim. A child raised inside, acknowledged, legitimized, is a different equation entirely. Amara sat with that. She sat with it and felt it assemble itself into sense, horrible sense, the kind of sense that recontextualizes everything you thought you understood about your own life. He didn't do it to hurt us, she said slowly. No. He did it because of what Elias represents to the organization. Yes. She pushed back from the table. She needed a centimeter of space between herself and this information. And you, what do you want out of telling me this? Miran met her gaze without flinching. Webb has controlled me for 15 years with those records. I want that to end. She paused. And something shifted in her expression. I want Jun Hyuk to know the full truth, whatever he does with it. She looked down at the portfolio. I made choices that were wrong. I'm not asking for absolution, but I won't let Marcus Webb use my silence anymore. Amara stood up. I need those documents, she said. All of them. Miran closed the portfolio and pushed it across the table. She called Jun Hyuk from the parking lot. He picked up before the first ring finished. I have everything, she said. Webb, the accident, the surveillance, all of it. I have documents. A pause. Where are you? Culver City. She was already walking to her car. I need to know something. The surveillance on my building. If Webb has it, your people can find it. How long does that take? An hour, he said. Maybe less. Do it now. She got in the car, locked the door. And I need to know where Webb is, right now, today. Amara, my son. She said it very clearly, each word separate. He made a threat about my son. I need to know where Marcus Webb is before I do anything else. She heard Jun Hyuk speak to someone, Han, she assumed, in Korean, quick and hard. And then he was back. I'll find him, he said. Don't find him for me, she said. Find him for Elias. And then we are going to sit in a room with all of this evidence and figure out what comes next. She started the car. Together. The word sat between them on the line. She had not intended it to land the way it landed, but she did not take it back. Together, Jun Hyuk said. She pulled out of the parking lot. She had driven 3 blocks when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she recognized as Elias's school. She glanced at it at a red light. This is an automated message from Jefferson Academy. Your student, Elias Bennett, was marked absent from first period. Please contact the main office. Amara's foot went to the brake before she understood why. She looked at the message again. Elias had walked into that building. She had watched him go through the front door. She had waited until it closed behind him, the way she always did, the habit of years. She called his phone. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. The light turned green. She did not move. The car behind her honked. She pulled to the side of the road, hazards on, both hands on the wheel, and she called the school's main office, and a woman answered and said yes. Elias Bennett had been signed out at 7:42 by an authorized adult on the emergency contact list. Who? Amara said. What name? The woman on the phone said, a Mr. Marcus Webb. He said there was a family emergency. The sound that came out of Amara then was not a word. She called Jun Hyuk. He answered in half a ring. He has Elias, she said. Her voice was a thing she did not know, something past controlled and past broken, something that lived on the other side of both. Webb took my son from school 20 minutes ago. The silence on Jun Hyuk's end lasted less than 2 seconds. Address, he said. The school address. She gave it. Don't move, he said. I'm coming to you. Jun Hyuk. She stopped. She looked at the school 2 blocks away, its ordinary brick face, its flag moving in the November wind. She thought about Elias in his uniform with his backpack, walking through that front door while she watched, trusting that the door was enough protection, that her watching was enough protection, that the life she had built so carefully was enough protection. He planned this. From the moment he found out you'd seen us, he had it ready. I know. He's using our son to stop us. The words came out of her before she fully understood she was going to say them. Our son. She heard it land. She felt Jun Hyuk hear it. He's not going to stop us, Jun Hyuk said. His voice had gone to a place she had not heard from him before. Not cold exactly, but past cold. Something more fundamental than cold. The voice of a man who has located the absolute bottom of what he is willing to tolerate and found bedrock. Stay where you are. I will be there in 12 minutes. He was there in 9. The black car came hard around the corner and pulled up behind her, and Jun Hyuk was out before it fully stopped, crossing the distance between the cars in 4 strides. And he came to her window, and she rolled it down, and they looked at each other through the glass for 1 second. Just 1 second. And in that second, 15 years of distance collapsed into something neither of them had words for. She got out of the car. She had the portfolio in her hands, Mi Ran's documents, 15 years of evidence about what had been done to them and to Elias. Tell me what you need from me, she said. Jun Hyuk looked at her. His face was not performing anything. It was simply his face, stripped of all its armor, and what was underneath was grief and fury, in equal measure, and something else she recognized because she had been carrying the same thing for 15 years. The specific pain of a person who has been made to believe a lie about someone they loved. I need you to trust me, he said. For the next few hours, I need you to trust me. She looked at this man she had not seen for 15 years, this man who had built an empire that frightened people, who existed in a world she had chosen to leave behind, who was also the man who had run across the street to pull her son away from a truck before he even knew whose son it was. She thought about Elias. She thought about what it meant that her son had looked at a photograph for 2 years trying to read a face he had never been allowed to know. Find my son, she said. And Jun Hyuk Kang, who had spent 15 years searching for something he had lost, turned back to his car with the specific movement of a man who has found what he was looking for and is not going to lose it again. Han had Webb's location in 11 minutes. A property in Inglewood registered under a shell company that traced back 3 layers to a holding entity Jun Hyuk had not looked at in 8 years because it had been dormant, because Marcus Webb had made sure it looked dormant, because Marcus Webb had spent 30 years being very good at making things look like what they were not. Jun Hyuk sat in the back of the car with Amara beside him and a phone in each hand, and he did not let himself think about Elias in that building, did not let himself go there, because if he went there, he would lose the precision he needed right now, and precision was the only thing that was going to get the boy out intact. 3 exits, Han said through the phone. Ground floor loading access on the south side, 2 street-facing doors. The building is listed as a storage facility. Heat signatures suggest 4 to 6 people inside. Armed? Assume yes. Junhyuk looked at Amara. She was sitting straight, both hands flat on her thighs, her jaw set in a way that told him she was holding herself together by the same method he was, by not letting herself picture it, by staying in the logistics of now. I need you to stay in the car, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. I know, he said before she could speak. I know. But I need you where I can account for you, and I cannot do what I need to do in there if I'm accounting for you at the same time. He held her gaze. Please. The please cost him something. He was not a man who said it often. She heard that. If you're not out in 20 minutes, she said, I'm coming in. Give me 15. 20. Her voice did not leave room for negotiation. And you bring him out yourself, not someone else. You. Yes. The car stopped half a block from the building. Junhyuk got out. Tae Young and 2 others he had called in transit, men he had worked with long enough to trust in the specific way you trust people who have been in bad rooms with you and made the right calls, were already outside. No words. A look between them. They moved. The south door was padlocked from the outside, which told him the people inside were not planning to leave that way. He went around. The east entrance had a camera above it, the lens angled slightly wrong, repositioned recently, and that told him Webb had set this location up recently, probably in the last 48 hours, probably the moment he knew Jun Hyuk had found Amara. The man had been ready. Jun Hyuk had spent 30 years in an organization that required him to be ready for men who were ready. He went through the east door. The inside of the building was industrial. Concrete floors, high ceilings, metal shelving units along 3 walls that held actual storage containers, which meant Webb had been using this space for something real and had simply adapted it. Fluorescent lights, half of them off, casting the space in alternating light and shadow. He saw Elias immediately. The boy was seated in a chair near the center of the space, his wrists zip-tied to the armrests, not roughly. The ties were not cutting in, the chair was not punitive, and he was sitting with his back straight and his face arranged in an expression that Junhyuk recognized the way you recognize your own face in water. Elias was not panicking, he was watching, cataloging everything in the room, every person, every exit, every variable. He was running the same calculations Junhyuk ran in every room he walked into, the same instinct, and seeing it operating in a 15-year-old boy's face in a room like this one hit Jun Hyuk somewhere between his ribs with a force that had nothing to do with the physical. 2 men stood near Elias. A third was near the shelving on the far wall. A fourth, Jun Hyuk clocked him late, which was sloppy, which meant the sight of the boy had cost him half a second of attention, was above, on the metal catwalk that ran along the upper perimeter of the space. Marcus Webb was standing 20 feet from Elias, holding a phone and doing the thing Jun Hyuk had always found most dangerous about him, looking relaxed. He was 61 years old, and he was built like a man who had been strong in his 40s and had kept enough of it. Silver-haired, well-dressed in the deliberate way of someone who understood that appearance was persuasion. He looked like exactly what Amara had believed him to be, a generous, principled man doing good work in his community. And the gap between that appearance and what Jun Hyuk now understood him to be was the most dangerous kind of gap there was. Webb looked up. He saw Jun Hyuk. He did not look surprised. I was wondering how long, Webb said. His voice was warm. That was the thing that turned Jun Hyuk's stomach. The voice was genuinely warm. The voice of a man who had practiced warmth so long it had become his natural register. Jun Hyuk walked forward until he was 10 feet from Webb and stopped. His men had fanned out behind him in his peripheral vision. Webb's men had straightened, hands moving toward places where hands move when they are considering options. Nobody moved yet. Let the boy go, Junhyuk said. He's fine. Webb glanced at Elias with an expression that was nearly avuncular. Isn't that right, son? Don't call me that, Elias said. His voice was even. 15 years old, zip-tied to a chair, and his voice was even. Something in Junhyuk's chest made a sound it did not make out loud. The documents Miran has, Webb said, returning his attention to Jun Hyuk. I need those back. They're already out of her hands. Webb's expression did not change, but something behind it recalculated. Then you understand this conversation is about what happens next. He tilted his head. You have an organization, Junhyuk. A real one. Built over 30 years. Your father's work, and then yours. He paused. And now there's a boy. He looked at Elias again. A legitimate heir changes everything about succession. About liability. About what certain parties would be willing to do to control the line of transfer. His voice was patient. Pedagogical. The voice of a man explaining something to a student. I've spent 30 years keeping that organization stable. I deserve a return on that investment. You arranged an accident that put me in a hospital for 9 days, Junhyuk said. You separated me from my son. You spent 14 years inside the life of the woman I... He stopped. Reset. You call that keeping things stable. I call it long-term asset management. Webb's jaw tightened fractionally. You were 26 years old and you were going to walk away from everything your father built because of a woman. I made a decision. You made a decision about my life. Your father would have made the same one. Junhyuk looked at him. My father is dead. And you just told me more about what you thought of him than you intended to. Something moved through Webb's expression. The first real thing. He covered it quickly, but it had been there. A flash of something old and unresolved. The documents, Webb said, and an agreement about the boy's role in the organization. A formal arrangement. You acknowledge him. I get a seat at the table with real authority. That's the deal. There's no deal, Junhyuk said. Then we have a problem. We already have a problem. Junhyuk took one step forward. You took my son. Whatever you thought this conversation was going to be, it ended when you put your hands on my son. Webb's eyes shifted. A signal. Subtle. The movement of a man who'd been giving signals in rooms like this for 30 years. And the man on the catwalk above moved. Junhyuk had already tracked him. He was already stepping left when the man came off the catwalk, had already put a shelving unit between himself and the angle of descent, and the room went loud and fast. The specific chaos of a contained space when multiple people with specific intentions start acting on those intentions simultaneously. The two men near Elias moved toward him rather than toward the fight, which was the right tactical call. Protect the asset. And Junhyuk saw that and felt his throat tighten, and then Tae-young was across the room faster than anyone that size should move, putting himself between those men and the boy, and the sound of impact was something Junhyuk felt in his back teeth. Webb moved toward a door in the far wall. Junhyuk went after him. The door opened into a narrow corridor, cinder block walls, single overhead light, and Webb was fast for 61. Adrenaline and 30 years of knowing when to run. But Junhyuk had 15 years of something Webb did not have. 15 years of a particular compressed fury that had nowhere to go. And he caught him at the end of the corridor where a locked door stopped Webb cold. Webb turned. He had a weapon. Of course he had a weapon. And he brought it up. Junhyuk was already inside the distance where it mattered. He took Webb's wrist, and he took the gun, and he put Webb against the cinder block wall with a force that was not measured, and he held him there, forearm across Webb's chest, and for a moment the corridor was just the two of them, and the overhead light, and the sound of both of them breathing hard. Webb's face, up close, had finally lost the warmth. What was underneath was not what Junhyuk had expected. Not malice exactly. Not the face of a man who enjoyed cruelty. What was underneath was something colder and more ordinary. Pure, institutional self-interest. The face of a man who had spent his whole life making calculations and genuinely did not understand why this one wasn't working. You can't expose me without exposing yourself, Webb said. His breath was short. Everything in those documents implicates the organization. You put me away, you put yourself... I don't care, Junhyuk said. Webb stared at him. I spent 15 years building something I thought mattered, Junhyuk said. His voice was quiet in the corridor. Controlled, but the control was costing him. He could feel it costing him with each word. I spent 15 years telling myself the empire was the point, that my father's work was worth protecting, that the organization was a thing worth being. He pressed Webb harder into the wall. You know what it's actually worth? I'll tell you. It's worth 1 year with my son. 1 year of homework at a kitchen table and a kid coming downstairs at 7 in the morning. His jaw was tight. It's worth nothing compared to what you took from me. You understand? Nothing. Webb said nothing. Where's your phone? Junhyuk said. What? Your phone. Give it to me. Webb reached slowly into his jacket. Junhyuk took the phone. He stepped back, keeping the gun, keeping his eyes on Webb. You're going to call whoever you have watching the Bennett bakery, Junhyuk said. You're going to pull them, right now, while I'm listening. He held up the phone. And then you're going to walk back into that room and you're going to cut those zip ties yourself. And you're going to look at the boy you've been using as leverage for 15 years, and you're going to do it without saying a single word to him. He paused. Those are the only terms. Webb looked at the gun in Jun Hyuk's hand. He made his calculation. He took the phone. The call took 40 seconds. Jun Hyuk listened to every word, parsed the language against what he knew of surveillance operation protocols, and determined it was real. He walked Webb back into the main space. The room had resolved itself in his absence. Tae-young had a cut above his left eye that was producing more blood than the injury warranted and was applying pressure to it with the focused indifference of a man who had had worse. The man from the catwalk was on the floor, not moving but breathing. The two men who had moved on Elias were zip-tied to the shelving with their own materials, which had a poetry to it Jun Hyuk did not take time to appreciate. Elias was still in the chair. He was watching everything with those eyes. Webb crossed to him. He crouched down. He took a folding knife from his pocket. Jun Hyuk's hand tightened on the gun and then relaxed when Webb used it on the zip ties and only the zip ties. And he cut Elias free and stood and stepped back. Elias looked at his wrists. He rubbed one, then the other. He stood up from the chair slowly, getting the blood back into his legs. He was a little pale, otherwise intact. He looked at Webb. Then he looked at Jun Hyuk. Jun Hyuk crossed the room to his son. He stopped in front of him. He did not touch him. He did not know yet what the boy wanted from him, did not know where the lines were, did not know how to navigate this. And he stood close enough for Elias to see his face clearly, and he let the boy look. You okay? Jun Hyuk asked. Elias looked at him for a long moment. The same calculation Jun Hyuk had seen from across the street 2 days ago, from a distance. Up close, it was more detailed, more searching. The boy was reading him. He didn't hurt me, Elias said. I know, but that's not what I asked. Elias blinked. Something shifted in his face, a small fracture in the controlled surface, the first real thing showing through. I want my mom, he said. She's outside. Jun Hyuk turned to Tae-young. Get him to the car. He looked back at Elias. I'll be right behind you. Elias held his gaze for one more beat. Then he nodded and went with Tae-young, and Jun Hyuk stood in the middle of the room and watched him go, watched the specific way the boy walked, straight-backed, measured, holding himself together. And the watching was almost more than he could stand. He turned back to Webb. Webb was standing with the resigned stillness of a man who has run the numbers and found them coming up short. The warmth was entirely gone now. He looked his age. What happens now? Webb said. Now I decide what the documents are worth, Jun Hyuk said, whether I hand them to a federal contact or whether I handle this another way. He looked at Webb steadily. That decision depends on what you do in the next 72 hours. Whether you stay in Los Angeles, whether you contact anyone connected to this organization or to the Bennett family. He paused. Whether I have any reason in the next 72 hours to think about you at all. You're letting me walk. I'm giving you a window. Jun Hyuk picked up his coat from the floor where it had fallen in the corridor. What you do with the window is your decision. But understand this, the documents go to 3 separate people in the next hour. Federal, civil, and someone inside your network who has been waiting for a reason to move against you for a long time. He put the coat on. If something happens to me or to Amara or to that boy, all 3 receive everything simultaneously. He looked at Webb one final time. You spent 30 years being patient. Be patient for 72 more hours and then disappear. That's all this has to be. He left Webb in the building. Amara was out of the car before Elias had fully cleared the building's east door. She crossed the half-block at a speed that had nothing to do with dignity and everything to do with 15 years of keeping that boy alive and intact by the force of her own will, and she got her hands on him, his face, his arms, his shoulders. And she ran the inventory she had run on that sidewalk 2 days ago. But this one was different. This one had more history and more terror behind it. And Elias let her do it, stood still, and let her check him over with an unusual patience that meant he understood what this was costing her. "I'm okay," he said. "Mom, I'm okay." "Stop talking." "I'm Elias. Stop." He stopped. She finished. She pulled him in and held him, and he went stiff for 1 second. 15, too old to be held in the street. And then his arms came up around her, and he held back, and they stood on the sidewalk in Inglewood in the gray November morning, and neither of them said anything for a while. When she pulled back, she looked at his face, and something she had been holding since 7:42 that morning released in her chest with a physical sensation, like a cord cut. She looked up. Jun Hyuk had come out of the building and was standing 15 feet away, his coat on, a cut on his jaw she had not been able to see from this distance the day before, watching the two of them with an expression she had to look away from because it was too unguarded for a public street. She straightened. She kept one hand on Elias's shoulder. Jun Hyuk walked toward them. He stopped at a distance that was respectful, close enough to be present, far enough to not presume, and he looked at Elias. "I owe you a conversation," he said to the boy. "A real one. Whatever you want to ask me." Elias looked at him. The morning light was flat and gray, and it fell on both of them in a way that made the resemblance almost architectural, the same bone structure catching the same light in the same way. "Yeah," Elias said. His voice was steadier than a 15-year-old's had any right to be after the last 2 hours. "We have a lot of those to do." Jun Hyuk looked at Amara. She looked back at him. She thought about the hospital floor. She thought about 15 years of building something alone, brick by brick, out of fury and love in equal measure. She thought about what it meant that the man standing in front of her had run into a building with 4 armed men to get their son back, and had done it without hesitating, and had come out holding the son intact. She thought about Miran's documents, still in the portfolio in the back seat of her car. She thought about everything in those documents that was still unresolved, all the structural damage of 15 years that could not be repaired in a parking lot in Inglewood on a gray Tuesday morning. She thought about Elias saying, "Our son," in the dark hallway. No, she had said that. She had said it. And it had been true when she said it, and was true now, and she was not sure she was ready for all of what that meant. "We need to go somewhere," she said. "All 3 of us. Somewhere that isn't a parking lot." She looked at Jun Hyuk. "And you need to tell me everything. Not just what happened that night. Everything, what the organization is now, what you intend to do with those documents, what Webb walks away with and what he doesn't." She held his gaze. "And then I need to decide what I do next. Not with you. That's a different conversation. About Elias. About what you get to be in his life, and what that looks like, and what he wants." "Okay," Jun Hyuk said. "I'm making the decisions," she said. "About my son. That's not going to change just because you came back." "I know. I need you to actually know it, not just say it." "Amara." His voice was quiet. The same quality it had in the parking lot behind the bakery, the quality of something that has been used and worn until all the performance has come off it. "I walked away from 30 years of everything I built today. I walked into that building knowing I might not come back out. I did it because there was no version of today where I did not get him back." He paused. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because—" He stopped. Something moved in his jaw. "I'm here because you are both still alive, and I would like, if you will allow it, to be in the same room as that fact." The gray light sat on all 3 of them. Elias looked at his mother. She could feel him looking. She took a breath. "Get in the car," she said. "Both of you." Jun Hyuk moved to the door. Elias fell into step beside him, naturally, without thinking about it, the way 2 people walk together when something in their bodies has already recognized something their minds are still catching up to. And Amara watched them cover those 10 feet side by side and felt something shift in her chest that she had no name for yet. She got in the car. She sat in the back seat with her son on one side and the man she had spent 15 years grieving on the other, and the driver pulled into traffic, and nobody spoke for the first 2 blocks. Then Elias said quietly to Jun Hyuk, "You knew who I was, on the sidewalk, before the truck." A pause. "Yes?" Jun Hyuk said. "How?" Jun Hyuk looked at the boy. Something in his face went very still and very open at the same time. "Because," he said, "you look exactly the way I look when I'm trying not to show that I'm afraid." Elias absorbed that. He looked out the window. I wasn't afraid, he said. I know, Junhyuk said. Neither was I. And Amara, sitting between the two of them, felt the specific exhaustion of a woman who has held a structure together alone for 15 years begin, for the first time, to consider the possibility that she might not have to hold it alone anymore, and did not know yet whether that possibility was something she could afford to believe, or whether believing it was the most dangerous thing she had ever been asked to do, more dangerous than the building in Inglewood, more dangerous than Miran's documents, more dangerous than everything that had already happened, because all of that had required her strength, and this required something else entirely, something she had locked away on a hospital floor 15 years ago and was not sure she still had access to. The car moved through the gray morning, and somewhere in the city behind them Marcus Webb was making his calculation, and somewhere ahead of them was a conversation that none of them were fully ready for, and the three of them rode in silence through the Los Angeles traffic, while the question that had been waiting 15 years to be answered hung in the air between them, still unanswered, still enormous, still the most important thing in the room. They went to the bakery. It was the only place Amar could think of that belonged entirely to her. Not to the organization, not to the history, not to any version of the life that Marcus Webb had surveilled and cataloged and used. She had built that space with her own hands and her own money, and 15 years of mornings that started at 4:15, and whatever happened next was going to happen inside walls that knew her. Danny had the front running. She texted him to close early, gave him no reason, and he did not ask for one because he had worked for her long enough to know that when she used that particular flat tone in a text message, questions were not the right response. By noon, the bakery was empty and locked, and the three of them were in the back room, Amara at the prep counter, Elias at his table, Jun Hyuk standing near the door with his coat still on, until Amara looked at the coat and then looked at him, and he took it off and set it on the chair in the corner. She made coffee. She made it the way she always made it, with the small red pot on the secondary burner, measuring by habit. The normalcy of the action helped her think. She needed to think. Start from the beginning, she said. Not the accident, before. All of it that I don't know. Junhyuk sat down at the prep counter across from where she was standing. He put his hands flat on the surface, the same way she had put her hands flat on surfaces throughout this entire ordeal, and she noticed that and filed it. He talked for 40 minutes. He told her about Marcus Webb's role in the founding years, how Webb had been the connective tissue between her father's world and the legitimate one, how he had structured the legal framework that made the Kang operation survivable under scrutiny, how much authority that structural role had given him without anyone fully accounting for the accumulation of it. He told her about the specific mechanics of the accident, a car forced off a rain-slicked overpass by a vehicle that was never identified, which Webb had arranged through a man 3 degrees removed from anything traceable, the kind of arrangement that took 30 years of embedded relationships to access. He told her about waking up in Cedars-Sinai with Miran at his bedside, and 9 days missing from his memory, and a phone that was gone, and a version of events that he had not had the capacity to interrogate. He told her about the searches. Both of them. The one in the 2nd year that had gotten within 2 neighborhoods of finding her, and the one in the 5th year that had gotten close enough that Miran had redirected it using a false report that Amara had relocated out of state. He told it without editorializing, without asking her to assign him particular credit for trying, or particular blame for failing, just the sequence of events laid out in order. Elias listened to all of it without speaking. He sat at his table with his homework still open in front of him, not looking at it, listening with that quality of attention he had that was not passive. It was active, consuming, the attention of a person building a structure in their head from the materials being provided. When Junhyuk finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Miran? Amara said. What happens to her? Junhyuk looked at his hands. That's a harder question. I know it's harder. That's why I'm asking it. She withheld information that changed both our lives, he said. She allowed Webb to maintain leverage over her for 15 years rather than coming to me. She redirected 2 searches that could have... He stopped. His jaw worked. She also spent 15 years running parts of my organization with a competence that kept it functional during a period when I was not fully... He stopped again. She is not the same category of thing as Webb. No, Amara said. She's not. She poured the coffee, set a cup in front of him. She gave me those documents. She could have protected herself and didn't. She protected herself for 15 years. And then she stopped. Amara set the pot down. People change what they're doing when the cost gets high enough. That's not absolution, but it's something. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, like he had forgotten something about her and had just been reminded. "What do you want to do about her?" he said. "I want her out of any position where she makes decisions that affect my son," Amara said. "Beyond that, it's your organization. I'm not going to tell you how to run it." She paused. "Although," he waited, "I have some thoughts on that too." He almost smiled. Not quite, but the shape of it was there at the corner of his mouth, and she saw it, and something in her chest moved in a way she was not prepared for, and she looked down at her coffee. "The documents," Elias said. They both looked at him. He was sitting forward now, elbows on his table, looking at Jun-hyuk directly. "The ones Mi-ran gave my mom. You said you sent copies to 3 people, federal, civil, and someone inside." He paused. "What does that actually mean for the organization?" Jun-hyuk looked at his son. The word son had not been said aloud in this room yet, and they all knew it was in the air. "It means the organization changes," Jun-hyuk said. "The federal copy is a controlled disclosure. I have a contact who can manage how it enters the record. It implicates Webb centrally and the organization peripherally. The civil copy is leverage that stays cold as long as nobody does anything that requires activating it." He paused. "The third copy is insurance against Webb's network. People inside that network who were loyal to him because of what he knew, if they understand that the information is already out and Webb can no longer use it as protection, the loyalty structure dissolves." Elias absorbed this. "You're not going to get clean," he said. Not accusing, just accurate. "No," Jun-hyuk said. "I'm not going to get clean. Some things I did are things I did, and they don't disappear because my reasons for doing them have changed." He held Elias's gaze. "I'm going to get quieter, smaller. I'm going to spend the next several years restructuring what's legitimate and stepping back from what isn't." He paused. "That's the most honest answer I can give you." Elias looked at him for a long time. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Jun-hyuk said. "I'm not okay with all of it," Elias said. "I need you to know that. I'm 15, not stupid. I know you're not stupid. So don't talk to me like things are simpler than they are." His voice was very steady. "I've been thinking about who my father was for 15 years. I had a whole version of it, the guy who left." He glanced at Amara briefly. "And that version is gone now, and I don't have a replacement yet." He looked back at Jun-hyuk. "So I need time, and I need you to not push." "I won't push," Jun-hyuk said. "And I need you to be around." Elias looked at the table for one moment, then back up. "Not in a big way. I'm not asking for anything I can't take back if it doesn't work. I'm just saying," he paused. "Don't disappear again." The kitchen held that. Jun-hyuk's face did something Amara had never seen on it in the years she had known him. It opened completely, without any of the architecture he used to manage what showed and what didn't. For 3 seconds, he simply looked like what he was. A man who had been handed something he had believed for 15 years he did not deserve to have, and did not know what to do with his hands. "I won't disappear," he said. His voice was rough. "I promise you." Elias nodded once. Then he picked up his pencil and looked down at his homework with the particular focused intensity of a person who needs 30 seconds to themselves and has decided that homework is a reasonable proxy for that. Amara looked at Jun-hyuk. He looked at her. They had not, in any of this, talked about themselves. They had been careful about that, both of them, with the unspoken understanding that Elias came first and everything else waited. But Elias was looking at his homework, and the kitchen was quiet, and the afternoon light was coming through the high window above the prep counter at a low angle that made everything in the room look like something you'd want to hold still. "I'm not ready," Amara said. Quietly. "I know," he said. "I don't know if I'll get there." "I know that too. You need to understand it's not about whether I believe you." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "I believe you. About the accident, about the searches, about all of it. I believe it happened the way you said." She paused. "But believing you doesn't fix 15 years. It just changes what they mean." She looked up. "And I'm still figuring out what they mean." He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes?" "The bakery." He looked around the room. The equipment, the high shelves, The board above the secondary counter where she'd written the week's production schedule in her own handwriting. You built all of this. Yes. How? She looked at him. What do you mean, how? I mean, he paused, found it. You were 20 years old. You had a newborn. You had nothing from me. He said it flatly, without self-pity, just the accounting of a fact. How did you build this? Amara was quiet for a moment. One thing at a time, she said. The same way you build anything. She looked at the prep counter, at the flour dusting she hadn't wiped down from the morning. I was furious for a long time. I used it. Fury is actually very useful if you know how to hold it. It burns clean and it doesn't ask for anything back. She paused. And Elias. She glanced at her son. He needed me to be functional, so I was functional. Simple as that. Junhyuk looked at her and she let him look. I'm sorry, he said. It came out plain, without weight or performance. Just the two words, used correctly. For all of it. For the years. For what he grew up without. I know that an apology doesn't... No, she said. It doesn't. She met his eyes. But it's still the right thing to say. So, she picked up her coffee. Tea get. At 3 p.m, Han called. Junhyuk stepped outside to take it, and Amara watched through the small window in the back door as he stood in the parking lot where she had stood 2 nights ago, where he had told her about the accident, and she had told him to come back when things were simple. He was on the phone for 8 minutes. His posture changed twice, once tightening, once releasing, and she tracked it without meaning to, reading him the way you read someone you spent 2 years learning to read and then spent 15 years trying to forget. He came back inside. Webb is gone, he said. Crossed into Nevada this morning. Han has confirmation. Amara set down her cup. He ran. He calculated his odds and he ran. Junhyuk sat back down. The federal contact received the documents an hour ago. Webb's name is in the system now. He can run to Nevada or he can run further, but the document is already where it is. He paused. He's done. He should be in a cell, Elias said without looking up from his homework. He might be, Junhyuk said. That's the federal contact's decision now, not mine. But you handed it to them. Yes. Elias looked up. Why? You could have handled it the other way. Your way. He said it without judgment. He was asking an actual question. Junhyuk looked at his son, because the other way would have been one more thing I couldn't tell you about, he said. And I've already got enough of those. Elias held his gaze. Then he looked back at his homework. Okay, he said. That's a decent answer. But at 4:30, Miran called Amara directly. Amara almost let it go to voicemail. She answered. It's done? Miran asked. Webb is gone, Amara said. The documents are in. A silence. Then, good. Her voice was flat in a way that was different from her usual controlled flatness, emptied out rather than managed. What will you do? Amara asked. She did not know why she was asking. Step back from operational roles, Miran said. I've been running pieces of that organization for 15 years. I don't think... She stopped. It's time for something different. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Another pause. Ms. Bennett. Her voice shifted. Something in it that Amara had not heard from her before. Not quite remorse, but adjacent to it. The voice of someone who has looked at their own choices from a new angle and found the view uncomfortable. I made decisions about your life that I had no right to make. I told myself they were necessary. For a long time I believed that. She paused. I don't believe it anymore. Amara stood in the front room of the closed bakery, one hand on the counter, looking at the black letters on the white sign through the front window. Bennett's, her name, on a building she owned. I know, she said. That's all I wanted to say. Myran. Amara stopped. The records Webb had on you, the leverage. She paused. Are they in what you gave me? A silence. Yes. 2 documents near the back of the portfolio. I'll destroy them, Amara said. That's between you and me. Not part of what goes to anyone else. The silence on Miran's end was long enough that Amara thought the call had dropped. Why? Miran said finally. Because they're yours, Amara said. Not mine to use. She paused. And because you stopped. She looked at the sign. People get credit for stopping. Another silence. Then Miran said, "Thank you." Just that. Plain and unadorned, the thank you of someone who is not accustomed to receiving things without a transactional structure attached. Amara hung up. She stood in the front room for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen. Babam. Junhyuk left at 6. He stood at the back door with his coat on, and he looked at Amara and then at Elias, and he said goodnight to both of them, separately, by name, with the deliberate care of a man who is aware that each of those goodbyes is something he did not have yesterday and is not going to take casually. Elias said goodnight back. He said it normally, the way you say goodnight to someone who is becoming a regular part of the texture of your life. And the normalcy of it was the most extraordinary thing Amar had witnessed in 2 days of extraordinary things. At the door, Junhyuk paused. "The photograph," he said to Amara. "The one Elias found in your closet." She looked at him. "I have one too," he said. "Same one, I think. Overexposed along one edge." He paused. "I kept it in my office. Behind my desk, turned toward the window." He held her gaze. "I just wanted you to know that." She said nothing. He nodded once and went out. She stood at the closed door and listened to the car pull away, and then she turned around, and Elias was watching her from his table with that look. "He kept a picture of you," Elias said. "I heard." "For 15 years. I heard, Elias." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to be weird about this forever?" She looked at her son. "I'm going to be careful about this for as long as I need to be careful about this. There is a difference." He considered that. "Fair," he said. She started cleaning up the kitchen. After a moment, without being asked, Elias got up and started helping. They worked side by side in the way they always worked, coordinated without discussion, the choreography of people who have occupied the same small spaces for 15 years, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary sounds of the end of a day. Running water, the clatter of the container lids, the hum of the oven that was still making its slightly different sound, still requiring its expensive repair, still Amara's problem in the way that everything was Amara's problem. She found, standing at the sink with her hands in the water, that she did not mind that as much as she sometimes had. 3 weeks passed. They were not simple weeks. Nothing that happened in them was easy or resolved cleanly. Junhyuk came to the bakery on a Tuesday. He called first, which Amara had told him was required, and sat at the prep counter and drank coffee while Elias finished his shift stacking the afternoon delivery, and the two of them talked about the delivery, about the weight of the commercial flour bags, about whether the secondary shelving unit needed reinforcing, and it was the most mundane conversation Amar had ever eavesdropped on, and she stood in the back room listening to it and felt something in her chest go very quietly to pieces. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. He never stayed long. He never pushed into rooms he hadn't been invited into. He brought nothing, no gifts, no gestures, no attempts to purchase goodwill, and the absence of those things was itself a form of information she filed and weighed. One afternoon in the 4th week, he arrived to find Elias at his table doing calculus and Amara at the prep counter doing end-of-month accounts, and he sat down without a word, and Han sent him something on his phone that required responses, and he dealt with those quietly for 20 minutes while Elias did calculus and Amara did accounts. And at some point, Amara looked up and saw the three of them in the same room doing 3 separate things in a silence that was not uncomfortable, and she had to look back down at her accounts immediately because the looking had done something to her she was not ready to process. After he left that day, Elias said without preamble, "He's trying." "I know," Amara said. "Are you?" She looked at her son. "Yes," she said. Slowly. Elias nodded, satisfied, and went back to his calculus. The federal case against Marcus Webb opened 6 weeks after the documents were filed. It moved slowly, the way federal cases moved. Webb had surfaced in Phoenix, which meant he had not run far and had perhaps calculated that running far was an admission. He had lawyers. He had 30 years of careful architecture between himself and the most direct evidence. It was going to be a long process. Junhyuk told Amar this over the phone one evening. She was in her apartment above the bakery, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the week's schedule, and he was somewhere in his building, and they talked for